hands up in memory of George Floyd. Given what's happened, did you feel apprehensive?
Yeah, definitely. But I think that, especially as a white person, it's like my life is much more protected right now than other people's lives. So I felt apprehensive, but I think for me it was important to come out no matter what.
What we're seeing is that law enforcement is being used to antagonize us, and they're actually the ones being violent. So it's like we're coming here to protest against police brutality, and we're facing it here at the protest.
Our streets!
Security forces weren't as visible here, a definite factor in taking the heat out of the situation. This is what things had looked like the night before: sound bombs and smoke canisters and pepper spray. And the president's been threatening the use of the military, something his own defense secretary now says he does not support.
The option to use active duty forces in a law enforcement role should only be used as a matter of last resort, and only in the most urgent and dire of situations. We are not in one of those situations now. I do not support invoking the Insurrection Act.
A feature of the last week has been attacks on the media as well. Our own cameraman charged down by an officer close to the White House.
You're under arrest. Okay.
A CNN reporter arrested live on air. An Australian cameraman punched by an officer in riot gear. And a German reporter shot at by police with a pellet gun. And yet thousands are still taking to the streets across the country. These scenes from the latest protests in Portland, Oregon, featured demonstrators laying on their fronts in silence for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, the length of time a police officer knelt on the neck of George Floyd, killing him. The mother of his 6-year-old daughter said he'd been a good father who'd provided for them.
He would never see her grow up, graduate. He would never walk her down the aisle.
A picture of George Floyd has now been added to the spot where he took his last breath. America's choking, strangled rallying cry for change. Aleem Maqbool, BBC News in Washington.
Here, thousands of people have taken to the streets of London to join in the protests at the killing of George Floyd. The event was organised by the Black Lives Matter group and began in Hyde Park. Chichi Uzundu was there.
George Floyd!
The gesture of a generation, a protest against needless death. Thousands gathered at London's Hyde Park to march against racism in solidarity with the protests in the United States.
Just because of the way you're born.
This is Louise, her mum Margaret and her son Jago. Louise says she dreads the day she'll have to sit her son down and explain why he may face discrimination.
The truth of the matter is I will have to have that difficult conversation, and I will have to say that there are certain things that you should do and certain things you should say, and be mindful of who you are, your race, and how people might see you and judge you and treat you.
And it's that treatment that Star Wars actor John Boyega is also angry about.
Black lives have always mattered. We have always been important. We have always meant something. We have always succeeded, regardless. And now is the time. Why are you waiting?
People here are angry. They say that this has been a long time coming and that the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis in the United States is just a catalyst to express how they're feeling. They say that the UK is no different when it comes to racism.
Organisers thought only up to 1,000 people would walk with them today, so this is a turnout of support they didn't expect. This is a demand for change echoing around the world, and the voices from the UK also want to be heard. Chichi Uzundu, BBC News.
Rolls-Royce has revealed the extent of job cuts in the UK. 3,000 job losses are expected by the end of this year, with half of them expected to be at its Derby-based headquarters. A further 700 jobs will be lost at its plant near Glasgow. It's due to a downturn in the aviation industry because of the coronavirus pandemic. The firm has begun the process by offering voluntary redundancies to everyone across its UK civil aerospace division. Around a third of all coronavirus deaths in the UK have been in care homes. At the height of the pandemic, thousands of elderly people were still being discharged from hospitals and taken to care homes without being tested first to see if they had the virus. It contributed to a perfect storm, says the Care Association in England. More than 19,000 people were admitted to care homes from hospital in the 25-day period between March the 23rd to April the 16th, according to NHS England. Our social affairs correspondent Michael Buchanan reports.
Bernard Curtin needed to be moved to a care home after a hospital stay in March. The first place his family found would only take him if he had a test for coronavirus.
I pushed the hospital for a COVID test repeatedly, and eventually one of the doctors said to me, "We cannot do it. Public Health England will not allow us to do it."
The 80-year-old languished in hospital for 2 more weeks while his family scrambled to find another care home. Within hours of him moving to the new place, he began showing signs of the virus. He died a week later, leaving his daughter bereft.
He was alone and he was confused because he had Alzheimer's and he was frightened. He needn't have died in that way on his own. All I heard him say was, "Get me out of here, get me out of here." And I couldn't get him out of there. Had he been tested, he would have been gone out of there.
Bernard Curtin was one of more than 19,000 people discharged from hospitals in England into care homes in the first 3 weeks of the lockdown. The figures are down on the same time last year, and NHS bosses say that shows they were working to protect the care sector. But social care leaders say sending patients either untested or with COVID-19 into homes full of ill and elderly residents led to unnecessary deaths.
Well, I think it has to have been a contributory factor to the way that the spread happened in the services that people were discharged into. There can be no doubt about that. So despite assurances that this was not going to have a huge impact, we then found ourselves with the lack of PPE as well, as that was being requisitioned away from the care sector. So actually it was a perfect storm.
Nearly 15,000 people have died of COVID-19 in care homes across the UK. Figures out today show that in Scotland there have actually been more deaths in social care than in hospitals. At this care home near Durham, they take in people recovering from the disease. By segregating them from other residents, they show it can be done. But it's risky, and if they didn't need the money, they'd be less inclined to do it.
We first and foremost decided to take it because there was nowhere for them to go. Of course there is, in the background, this massive elephant in the room, which is the financial pressure and the cliff that we're all facing.
The Curtin family are full of praise for the hospital staff who cared for Bernard in his dying days. But they want a public inquiry, as they feel their father and many others were badly let down. Michael Buchanan, BBC News.
It's been 6 months now since this virus first came to light, and scientists are learning more about it every day. So-called super spreaders are of particular interest, the 10% of infected people who are responsible for 80% of all cases. Our science correspondent Rebecca Morell reports.
An outbreak in a nightclub district in South Korea. One man with COVID-19 is linked to more than 150 new cases. Coronavirus clusters aren't unusual. As few as 10% of people could cause 80% of all infections.
This is how coronavirus spreads. If the virus is left unchecked, one person will infect 3 others, who will then pass it on to 3 more. And this keeps on repeating. But this is the average picture. In reality, some people won't pass the virus on at all, especially if they're self-isolating. Others, though, will spread it more widely. So one person could give the virus to 10 other people, and a few of those could do the same. This is a super spreading event.
Some people might just shed more virus than others, but I think a lot of it's going to depend on what people do when they're infectious. So if someone, particularly just before symptoms, when they're most transmissible, happens to go to an all-day meeting with a large number of people and then go out for dinner afterwards, you may well see a super spreading event.
Right now, this is the only way to sing together. But pre-lockdown, choirs saw several super spreading events. Bars and restaurants also had clusters, and gyms too. it's not just about close indoor contact.
There are more clusters linked to Zumba classes than there were to Pilates, for example. So it might be